So good afternoon. Try again. Good afternoon. Okay, this is the part where you are kind of sleepy and groggy. It's a beautiful day outside. Let's make sure that we are with this alive, active, etc. I'm very happy to be here. It's always interesting when I'm given a time limit. It generally takes me about 18 minutes to clear my throat. And so what I want to do with us is give you some, a taste of what Common Way is about, a taste of what I think our real issues are, a taste of how we actually interact with each other and actually connect with each other in this world. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge those who went before me. One of the things that I think that are our more recent movements, the mistake that they have made, is not going to the people who actually have had the expertise in changing institutions. And they think, oh, hey, I'm 25 years old, I know everything, so therefore let me go and inflict myself on the world. I recognize that there's some people who have influenced me, and some of them have passed on. I'm thinking particularly about Ashley Montague and Grace Lee Boggs. I'm fortunate that some of them are still with us. I spent 18 or 19 years working, on and off, working in Sri Lanka with the guy who is known as the Gandhi of Sri Lanka, Dr. A.T. Aryaratne. And one of the real lions of our of the movement of transforming our world, transforming our society, is right in the room with us right now. Carl Anthony. I'm going to ask Carl to stand. Yes. So after my remarks, Carl and I are going to engage in a conversation that is a conversation between the two of us, but it's also going to be a conversation that involves all of you. You don't actually get that many opportunities to connect with this kind of true genius, and I guess I would say applied genius, is not just going off in a corner and thinking some really cool thoughts. It's actually putting your butt on the line. So I want to ask you a question, and I don't want an answer right now. I want you to think about your answer. What have you heard in the last 3 days that you did not know when you walked in the room? You've heard a lot of different things. But what did you hear in the last 3 days that you did not know when you walked in the road? Like you said, oh my God, I didn't know that. And let me make sure I write that down. Well, I'm hoping that in the next 18 minutes, you're going to be getting a lot of that. You're going to be getting a lot of, oh my God, I didn't know, or I didn't think of things that way. And I want to share that with you because what we're doing, what I'm doing, is trying to introduce all of us to a very different worldview, a very different way that we are looking at our world and how we all fit into it. I want to read something to you. I guess I should have added one of my mentors and one of my elders and someone I have had a great deal of respect for was Václav Havel, the president of Czechoslovakia and then the Czech Republic, a person who was the architect of the Velvet Revolution. He was kind enough to write the introduction to my book, Creating a World That Works for All. And in the introduction, he says, humankind today is well aware of the spectrum of threats looming over its head. We know that the number of people living on our planet is growing at a soaring rate. We know that the already deep abyss separating the planet's poor and rich could deepen further. We also know that we've been destroying the environment on which our existence depends, and that we're headed for disaster by producing weapons of mass destruction and allowing them to proliferate. And yet, even though we're aware of these dangers, we do almost nothing to avert them. This is a very eloquent and a very considered way of saying that we're all stuck on stupid. We know what to do. We know that we are facing fundamental change, and yet what we're doing is biting around the edges. We're trying to produce incremental changes without understanding the profundity of the problem. So our challenge is, do we actually get it? We're talking about this being California 2020. We've been talking about vision, but the question is, what is this vision that we keep talking about? I would suggest to you that there are 2 or 3 different visions that need to be talked about in order for us to look at what our future is. One of our visions is incremental change. The status quo is basically okay. What we need to do is change some of the political leaders. We need to tweak some of the institutions. We need to make some of the, make some adjustments, bring more people who have been left out of the process historically into the process, and we'll be okay. That future has almost zero possibility of actually happening. You've heard the joke about there's a guy looking for his car keys under a street lamp, and so it gets a couple people help him, and then we're not finding them. He says, where do you remember losing the car keys? He's like, well, I lost them 3 blocks away, but the light's better over here. So we're all looking under the street lamp for something that's not there. So this second vision is the vision of California if the center does not hold. What happens if the federal government actually goes away? Don't tell me that that's not possible. I was in Russia some years ago after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the second largest superpower on earth went away like that. Now, what will you do when that happens? Well, the thing that you have to do is going to be very different if the vision is this incremental thing of we're just going to polish up who's who in the State House. If we're talking about the center not holding, we're talking about having to create fundamentally new institutions. You're talking about having to create fundamentally new ways of working and living together. But then there's a third alternative. And that alternative is what I call dissolution. Everything goes to crap. All of our systems and structures fail. Don't tell me that's not possible. I was down in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, when right after their financial system disappeared. And it disappeared overnight. In one night, all the money that you've got in the bank, all your savings, all your bonds, everything is gone, and it's gone forever. What are you going to do? After you finish whining, crying, and going to the bank and banging on the door saying, hello, can I have my money? I was in Buenos Aires watching thousands upon thousands of people, formerly middle-class people, pulling through their neighbors' garbage cans looking for something to eat. Don't tell me that that can't happen here. And I'm from Camden, New Jersey. Don't tell me it's not happening right now. You remember in the movie Titanic, the folks up in first class are playing the violin and still eating their food, while the people down in steerage are already underwater. What proposals do we have? What are the things that we're going to do for the people who are already underwater? You walk 1 block around this building and count the number of homeless people you encounter. What have you heard up here that's going to resolve that? And believe me, that picture doesn't get better, it gets worse. And it gets worse until we solve it. That's our challenge, is that we have to solve it. So I've been witness to transformation in our society. I've been witness to, in talking to the kinds of people that you've been disparaging on this program. I talked to the white males who voted for Trump, the ones who you think are white supremacists, and what they are is scared. They're scared out of their wits. They have no idea what their future looks like. They have no idea. They feel helpless. They feel hopeless. They are engaged in negative social behavior because they're helpless and hopeless. If they were black, you would be saying, oh, I'm going to try to understand your music. I'm going to understand why you are disparaging of other people. I'm going to do this. And when they're white, you say that they're the problem. They know they're not the problem. They know they have no power. So our challenge is, where do we get our power from? How do we empower them as opposed to putting them down to the point that they are no longer a problem? Are we going to create a world that works for all, or are we going to create a world that works for me and my friends? Because if it's the latter, we're doing that right now. We're doing a good job, and we can congratulate each other, and we can feel really good that we're saying all the right things. I've got all the politically correct language, et cetera, and the beat goes on. So our challenge is, can we approach the real problem? And the real problem lies in our consciousness. Our consciousness of I am separate, or a consciousness of we are one. We are one with the people that we like, and we're also one with the people we may disparage. I'll tell you a really quick story. I get invited to be a consultant in a lot of different situations. I got called into a city that I can't name because there's still some lawsuits pending. It's a small West Coast city. in their public works department was all white guys, and these are the goodest of the good old boys. Okay, they are the sewer cleaners, they're the asphalt spreaders, and they are backslapping, hard drinking, hard working. Well, a Mexican guy comes and starts working in the workforce, and they greeted him the way that they greet each other, backslapping and name calling. They started calling him names. He called them right back. So they're talking about Beaner and Spick and so on and so forth, and then he's called them Cracker and Hunky, and they all go to beer. They all go to visit each other's homes. And this goes on for a year. For some reason, this guy was a temporary worker for a year. For some reason, he wasn't given a permanent job. He said, okay. So he walks out of public works, walks over to his lawyer's office. He and his lawyer go to the city hall and clean it out. Okay? And the city managers, in their wisdom, decided to settle that one real quick. And then they called me in, and they called me in not thinking that I was going to be able to do anything with them. They said that some of them were saying, we just have to fire these guys and start all over again. They're incorrigible. And I said, let me have a chance at them. So there were a dozen people named in the lawsuit. And when I walked in the room with them, they were hot. They were indignant. They kept saying, we didn't do anything wrong. We were just playing. All of us were playing together. This is the consciousness that we're dealing with. And I could have shamed them, and I could have pointed out how wrong they were, etc., and they would have never gone straight over their heads, and they would have remained unchanged. But instead, I had a different approach. I recognized who they were. I saw who they were. And for 4 hours, we dealt with, I know you feel no power. I know you feel that you've been put upon by a society that says you have power and you don't have any. I know that you are angry, and let me show you some ways to channel that into power and productivity. Yes, I'm doing empowerment work with white males. What a concept. Who'd ever thought I'd get there? So, before I started this work, I asked the city manager and the public works director, how many people do you think will actually change from the work that I'm doing? And they had a unanimous number. They said 0. These guys are not going to change. Out of the 12 of them, 11 made a commitment to change their behavior. And the one that didn't, I actually thought there were some mental problems with that person. And they wound up quitting because their negative behavior was no longer reinforced in the workforce. Like I said to people, I don't want you to like me. I don't want you to tolerate me. I want you to recognize that we all need each other, and the only way we're going to get to a world that works for all is by working together and supporting each other. I want to do one thing. I know my time is up. It's a very quick quote I want to read to you. It's not that one. Okay, it's this one. This is out of my book, and this is by a Brazilian theologian by the name of Rubem Alves. He says, "What is hope? It is a presentiment that imagination is more real and reality is less real than it looks. It is the hunch that the overwhelming brutality of facts that oppress and repress are not the last word. It is the suspicion that reality is more complex than realism wants us to believe, that the frontiers of the possible are not determined by the limits of the actual, and that in a miraculous and unexpected way, life is preparing the creative events which will open the way to freedom and resurrection. We are talking about the resurrection of the human spirit. We are talking about the resurrection, the transformation of a society that is the caterpillar into a revolution of the butterfly. We're all on that journey, and on that journey, I wish us all well. So thank you. While Carl is coming up, I'll tell you a story about my elders. I was doing a lot of speaking work some years ago, and one of the persons who kept showing up on my speaking tour was Ashley Montague, who was, well, if you don't know him, Google him. And people would not, they didn't want to deal with Ashley because he was slow, he was infirm, his hands would shake. So they would invite him up to talk and then just kind of leave him alone. And what I would do is I wanted to go to dinner with Ashley. I would help him cut up his food, etc., because I got to sit with one of the greatest minds in our world, of our time. I feel the same with regard to Carl. I was telling Carl early on that on almost all of my talks, I quote him. He said something some years ago. He said that an earthquake is not a natural disaster. It's a naturally occurring event. The disaster is putting your house on the fault line. And that is true with regard to all of the fault lines of our society. So, I just finished running my mouth. How you've been out there in the trenches, in the cutting edge of our society for a long time. What are some of the trends that you see, and what are some of the things that you feel called to at this point in time in our society?
I want to say that I've been very impressed by this conference and by the variety and diversity of many of the subjects and discussions that have been going on. And I was particularly impressed with the discussion about the microgrid, yeah. I thought this was seemed very remarkable that we would be able to produce, manufacture, produce, place, and engage the whole transformation of California in 10 years based upon this kind of technology. And the enthusiasm of the presenter was actually so incredible that I felt that he was very believable. And yet, in the back of my mind, there was this other question: is the technology the thing that can save us, or is there something else that we need to consider? And later on in the conversation, we got to a point where we were talking about race, and the conversation was quite different. It was as if there were people who were, I assume that most of the people who were talking about race were actually quite sympathetic to the conversation about microgrids. And yet we seemed, I would say, worlds apart. And I formed a notion that would be very interesting to think about. I said, what if we asked the engineers and the scientists and the people who are working on microgrids to produce, in addition to the microgrids in the 10 years, to say all of the people who are associated with the production of these grids would begin to look like the whole society. And I thought if we could design a process where we could create within that one sector an example of how an industry that is transformative could actually be paced and structured in such a way that it would also produce transformation in the society, we would be on the way home.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the problems that we have is compartmentalized thinking. I live in Portland, Oregon, and right now we have 5,000 people living on the streets in tents or in their cars under bridges. And we also have solar-powered trash cans on the street. And so downtown, when you put your trash in a can, there's a little machine that compacts it so you have fewer empties that you have to do and things like that. And I just want to get some homeless folks and the solar-powered trash compactor folks in the same room at the same time and say, okay, what are you proposing to do? How are you proposing to do it? And who thinks this is really a good idea? The people who do the thinking about social issues, drug abuse or prison reform or whatever, tend not to be the folks who are doing the microgrids, okay? They tend not to be the folks who are designing the next Cassini mission to Saturn. Now, I'm all in favor of Cassini, but I was in favor of Cassini. I shed a tear for the loss of Cassini now. But what if you said, okay, you can have your rocket to Cassini. We'll spend $2 billion on that. But before you do that, you've got to make a design for Camden, New Jersey. We're taking our best and brightest and having them working over here, and the human beings and the other beings that need our help are somewhere else.
But what was impressive to me was this process that was going on in my head. I said, we could actually do this. Mm-hmm. We could actually, in 10 years, produce a model of the society that we want to have pervasive in California, at the same time that we're producing a technology and implementing a technology that would produce those results. Mm-hmm. And I got kind of excited about that. Mm-hmm. You think that's possible?
No. Yes, it's definitely possible. And the question is, where is the consciousness shift that would then say for example, someone's looking for venture capital. Oh, you need to get your venture capital, but before you get your venture capital, you got to get some social capital. You've got to actually be working with and talking directly to the people who are in your community. Like I said, the homeless people I'm talking about are literally a few hundred feet away from the front door of this building. It's not like I don't know where any are. You're going to step across them, okay? And I'm starting to see a couple of hands going up. Carl, do you want to complete that, or you want to call out some hands?
I think it's possible, and I'd be very interested in hearing what people have to say.
Mm-hmm. Can we get a microphone here, please? We're having. Well, they want to pick you up on the tape, you. So yeah.
On your left.
Thank you. Carl and Shariff, I'm really delighted that you're bringing these two things together, because I've hit upon microgrids and community power as the place where social and technological concerns merge. the fact that we localize power enables us to actually bring the people from the community itself together with a technology that's not what I would call hyper-high technology. It's sort of mid-tech. Microgrids are relatively simple. They're really just solar, in the case of solar microgrids, they're the renewable energy, the solar panels, an energy storage form, which is usually a battery, and then an inverter. So it's relatively simple. You take it down to the level of a neighborhood. A neighborhood, I'm specifically choosing to start in Richmond, the city of Richmond, because it's a very diverse community, a lot of low-income people. There's already something called Richmond Build, which is training largely unemployed Richmond minority people as solar technicians, which is incidentally the fastest growing sector in the energy field nationwide and in California. It already employs 100,000 solar technicians nationwide. So what you do is you take it down to the local level. The mayor of Richmond has just indicated he's very interested in microgridding the city of Richmond. And you create a design conversation within each neighborhood, as well as in the city itself for its essential services. Then you have already at the table the people who are the diverse members of that community. You don't need to have a separate conversation about diversity and introducing that. And it's on a scale that's small enough that you can actually do the design together. It's no longer a conversation across left and right. It's a design conversation. It's more like a charrette in architecture, basically where you just bring everyone's separate intelligence and you gather them together in a different kind of process. It almost accesses a different part of the brain. So, Carl, I think what you're suggesting should be integral to the way we do microgrids. In other words, we are building community just as much as we are building a technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to point something out. I laid out the 3 possible visions for California, and in each of those visions, something like the microgrid concept will work. If it's status quo, it'll work. If it's a fundamental rethink of what I'm calling the nation of California, it'll still work. If the systems and structures that run our society right now, if everything goes down the tubes, it better work, okay? Right, and so when I was in Argentina, the people who were trying to make something work were desperate because they didn't have food to eat, because they didn't have water, because things were that desperate. We've got this amazing window of time that we've been dancing around. What we need to do is hit it and hit it really firmly, and I think it holds great promise.
So, Sharif, suppose we ask a question of somebody who's been working in the field of racial healing or social equity, who knows something about. Is there somebody in the audience who could respond to this question about whether we could make this work?
The people who know that are sitting on their hands right now. So, okay, a hand just went up, and if we can get a microphone to you.
And by the way, that was Mr. Mark Summer speaking to us before. Mark Summer, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, my name is Deb Marois. I work here mostly in Sacramento.
Could you talk a little bit louder?
Sure. My name is Deb Marois. And actually, Carl, I serve with you on the Center for Regional Change Advisory Board at UC Davis. So we've been working on Coalition for Regional Equity and lots of equity type work through the university and other community organized approaches. And I'm not sure I have an answer to your question. Could this work? Of course, but I don't think we have 10 years. And I don't know if all of you know, the power went out this morning in Sacramento. And in Puerto Rico, after the natural disaster there, no one has power. We are so dependent on our technology, our electricity, everything else. We don't know how to live. This generation now coming up, they don't know how to function without the phone and the computer. And that's in every community, even the poorest folks often have smartphones. Yep. So I don't think we have 10 years to do this work. Mm-hmm. And I do think a lot of it is happening now, which is really encouraging. And so that's my immediate response to your question.
Shariff, just letting you know we have just short of 10 minutes for this session.
Thank you. And I'd like to respond to that. No, we don't have 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes. We don't have 10 years. I wrote a book. My latest book is called The Chronicles of the Upheavals, and it's my first attempt at speculative fiction. This book was actually given to me when I was in the Himalayas. I was at the 15,000-foot level trying to breathe. It's really interesting up there. And fasting in a cave that had no human beings around it for 15 miles in any direction. And wondering how a guy from Camden gets there. And I got zapped this book, and the book is set 100 years in the future. And 100 years from now, it makes the assumption that we make it. Humanity makes it. Every bad thing you could possibly imagine happens. But we get through that. And so these folks 100 years from now want to find out, how did we get through this? So they commission a history of their last century. The history starts in their past at 2025 and follows a young person through the upheavals. In the book, half of humanity dies. 4 billion people die. Now, that may sound pessimistic, but compared to what some of our scientists are saying, people like James Lovelock, people like Jay Hansen, people like Stephen Hawking, that's very generous because they're saying we're all toast. So the challenge that we've got is, how do we make it? A lot of people don't like my solutions in the book, and I tell them, fine, rewrite the chapter. But you can't change the circumstances. You can't say automatically, oh, there'll be manna falling from heaven, so everybody will have something to eat. Unless you got a manna factory, I don't think that's going to happen. I saw a hand right here. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. This is Jorge Rebagliati from Santa Rosa, and I'm representing the Climate Change Major Disaster Declaration campaign. Well, first of all, about Puerto Rico, I found out last night that there is a dam that may break in Puerto Rico, and so thousands of people have to be evacuated, but most of those people don't have electricity, so there is no way to call them. So they have to be warned physically, and they are in, possibly hard to get areas. So here we see the dependency on electricity.
Technology. Right.
Yeah. So my comment about what you were talking about, we see climate change as the greatest opportunity for humans to change.
Could you repeat that again? Because that's what I think. Say it again.
I said that climate change is offering the greatest opportunity for humanity to change, to evolve. And perhaps because of that, we've been resisting acting on it for over 40 years. So now we're against the wall. Climate change is just telling us, either you change or you're out. And we are getting, we have gotten, very good examples in the last few weeks in our country. We are proposing that to make climate change the goal, solving climate change, the goal for our society. Not a weekend project, but the goal. And in that process, even if we don't get all the results that we want to, because climate change is very advanced, we have the greatest opportunity of having a new society, a new relationship to technology, and a new relationship to the environment.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting question here. As I recall the conversation by a minister who was with us this morning, who talked about the process of healing, and she talked about the problem when you don't get the what was it called, the passes of your pardon me?
The vascular tissue, yes.
Yeah, if you don't get that hooked up, then there's no healing. And that as these problems that we have been festering for hundreds of years. So what are the steps, the essential steps that would be necessary, besides going to the church with this woman who did a wonderful job this morning? What would be the steps that would be necessary to make the calculations? If people calculate what we're going to do, so we have microgrids with calculations about all the energy that's being generated. Do we have those kind of calculations for what it would take to produce a transformation of social order in society?
I haven't seen it. And the reason I haven't seen it is that I think we haven't understood that it's us together, okay? If you asked me, what will it take for us to heal the rift, I can give you my response to that. But if you ask a different question, how long will it take to get equity for African Americans and reparations, et cetera? That's a very different question. Okay. Now, one can be subsumed into the other, but I am not able to just respond to the one-sided question. How do you stop white supremacy? If you try to stomp on it, you make it stronger. I just got a time signal that says we're just about out of time. I have really enjoyed being up here with you. It's been a true honor. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shariff. I've enjoyed it as well, and I'm hoping that the generation of topics, I was very pleased that these topics were put side by side for all of us. So we had both sides of this equation, and then we had some others too. So I was really excited about that. And I think even for the moment, it gave me hope. And I think this is the challenge that we have. The majority of people in California are people of color. We're listening, we're watching the earth burn, and we're motivated. And I think the climate change issue gives us a timeline. And it's an opportunity that is actually global in scope, that nobody knows exactly how to do this. But we have every reason to really join together to make it happen. And we have people who know how to do parts of it. Yep. And so the question is, can we join together to be able to put together the strategies that will give hope to those who are most in need in the neighborhoods and communities, together with the scientists and other people in a much more proactive engagement in order to make it happen. And I thank you so much for bringing those things together.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Sharif
Yeah.
and Carl, do we want to mention something, or is someone going to mention something about Carl's book? We would want to do that. Yes. And by the way, he has written a lifelong journey in a book that's coming out next month. But go ahead, Carl, just say a second about that, or 30 seconds about your amazing book.
The book is called The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race. And, you know, it's a little bit surprising, but not so surprising, that we thought we would go back in time to the very beginning. The book really addresses the question of deep time and the kinds of things that have happened since the Earth was formed and since before the Earth was formed 13.7 billion years ago. But one of the things about the Earth story or the universe story is that it gives us a chance to really look at all these things from a perspective that is really much farther away than we've been used to looking at them. And when we see that the struggles that we've been engaged in can be part of a larger story, and we have been involved with it for the last 30 or 50 years, and we've been tracing some of the activities we've been involved in to create that kind of transformation, and the book is about that. And so it's about the ways in which we can learn to say yes as well as no, but we need to be, what we're against needs to be really strong. But I think we need to build up the muscles that we can use to say yes. So
Let me ask a question. How do people get the book?
well, we have a few copies here.
Yay. We're going to start auctioning them off. Bidding starts at $100.
Paloma, do you know what we can do to get books here?
Yes, we have some books with us today, and also we can, if you go to our website, earthcityrace.net, there's a way to click and order the book right there.
Okay.
So earthcityrace.net. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Sharif.
Yep.
This is an amazing moment to be together and reinvent a vision for California.
Yay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Very cool. Very cool.